X-Men 97 was a surprise hit that came out of nowhere, and you should really watch it if you haven't already. When you combine that with the fact that Marvel vs. Capcom is returning, plus the newly released Deadpool and Wolverine film, 2024 is really shaping up to be the year of the X-Men, and that's something that's been a long time coming, considering Marvel has actively been trying to destroy these characters for about the last decade or so, in a frustrating effort to replace them with their MCU stars. But apparently that was a worthwhile thing for them to do, because now the fox has been consumed by the mouse, and all the prodigal sons have returned. Well, most of them at least. Anyway, point being, Deadpool and Wolverine was actually a good movie. I know, it's shocking to say that a Marvel film is good in this day and age, but it's true. And it's not even like those other films that are just okay at best, but we consider them good because they're not as horrible as everything else. No, Deadpool and Wolverine is actually good, and worth watching more than once. Now, that's not to say that this movie is flawless, because it certainly has a large amount of problems, that we will talk about in a moment. But first, just be warned that this review will contain minor spoilers, so watch at your own risk. And with that, let's begin. To start off, we have to talk about the film's biggest issue, that being the multiverse. The entire plot centers around this concept, and it is just as confusing and contrived as it always is. The storyline itself is very meta, as, to paraphrase, the basic plot line is that after Logan passed away in his last film, the Fox universe as a whole slowly started crumbling. Don't ask me how that works. Then the TVA, aka the Multiverse Police for those of you who haven't watched Loki, have offered to allow Deadpool to pass safely into the MCU universe if he does them some favors. But Deadpool doesn't want to because he would rather save his own universe. So he tries to recruit an alternate universe Wolverine to replace the one that died. But that doesn't work for some reason. So the two of them get sent to the multiversal trash bin, which might as well be called Cameo Town, because it is a place that is jam-packed full of obscure Fox movie characters, and pretty much nothing else. So Deadpool and Wolverine are forced to find their way out of the trash bin in order to save their universes. In other words, this story is basically wild nonsense that you kinda just have to roll with in order to enjoy the characters that are in it. The destruction of the universe makes no sense, the setting makes no sense, the characters in the setting don't make sense being there. It's truly one of those turn your brain off and don't think about it types of stories. As an example, they bring back X-23, and it's like, oh, that's neat. Is she the same one as before? Hard to tell. She talks as if she is, and she tries to tell Logan about all the good things his alternate self did for her, but, I mean, it couldn't have been that good, considering she ended up in a multiversal trash bin, and the entire movie raises concerns like this throughout its runtime. So you really just have to let it go, and accept that she and the others are just here, and that's all there is to it. Though the silver lining is that the focus of the film is more so on the characters than the plot anyway. Still, it would be nice if we could just have this awesome team up in one world, in one film, with one Deadpool, one Wolverine, and one continuity, instead of having to ignore the fact that if either of these two die, then they could just be easily replaced by an alternate version of themselves. And we have to ignore the fact that nothing these two do matters, because even if their universes die, it's guaranteed that there are identical universes out there anyway. So, nothing lost, nothing gained. There are no stakes here. However, with that all said, the movie itself seems to agree with me, as one of the highlights of this movie is that Deadpool viciously mocks Disney and the recent MCU failures at every opportunity, to the point where it's surprising that Disney even let this film see the light of day. Deadpool makes fun of the recent flops, he makes fun of the struggling Blade film, he even just straight up asks if the MCU can be done with multiverses once this film is over. It's incredibly gratifying to watch, as it tells us that at least someone within Marvel is aware of how bad things have gotten. I doubt any real change will occur as a result of these jokes, but still, they are nice to see. Deadpool himself is as good as ever, he's funny, he gets good action, and he looks like he was plucked straight out of a comic book. It seems pretty clear that Ryan Reynolds knows the source material, and is trying his best to stay true to it. Now, some of you longtime viewers may say, hey, why do you criticize every other character for making too many jokes, but when Deadpool does it, it's fine? Well, that's because the wacky, LOL, so random, quippy humor is Deadpool's whole thing. It's what that character is all about, and you wouldn't expect any less from him. It's the fault of every other movie for trying and failing to mimic Deadpool's style, instead of being true to their own source material. That said though, I do have some nitpicks, as the R rating seems to have made Deadpool's word choice rather repetitive, considering his reaction to almost any situation is, "Whoa, what the fuck?" And not to sound like a prude, I certainly appreciate a good fuck bomb every once in a while, but when the guy says it every other line in a feature-length film, it gets pretty old pretty fast. Like, there are other words, dude. I would hope that the merc with a mouth would have a wider range of vocabulary, but again, this is just a nitpick. Another criticism is that I have been waiting since movie 1 to see Deadpool get a teleporter, and we have yet to see that outside of X-Men Origins Wolverine, and that is a crying shame. Speaking of Wolverine, Hugh Jackman is as great as ever in the role, and it's so nice to finally see him in the classic costume. So many supposed film experts have been saying for so many years that his costume could never work on the big screen, but guess what? He wore it, and it looked great. It added depth to his character, and audiences loved it. He also wore a few variations of his costume, and they all looked great, and there were no problems whatsoever. Turns out you can just do that and it'll be fine. Who knew? To paraphrase how Deadpool put it, he looks like he's finally not afraid to be in a superhero movie. On top of the looks, the R rating means we can finally see a Wolverine in his prime go all out in his fight scenes, and it is incredibly satisfying to watch. I do, however, have a few nitpicks with him, in that they establish him early on as the worst of all the Wolverines in the multiverse, but he's really not bad at all. Not nearly bad enough to hold that title at least. TLDR, his X-Men got killed by humans, so he went on a human-killing rampage to get revenge. Well, that's not a great thing to do, but it's fairly tame as far as the infinite possibilities of the multiverse should go. It's hardly worse than Magneto. This is another reason to avoid multiverse stories. Another gripe is that this version of Wolverine that we see seems to be a one-and-done character, and we will have to wait a bit longer to see an actual in-universe MCU Wolverine. In fact, it's also unclear if Deadpool will be a part of the MCU himself, as although this movie certainly references the MCU a lot, it is rather self-contained and doesn't really bridge the gap between the Fox and Disney films in the way that I think a lot of people were hoping it would. The merger happened about a half a decade ago, and mutants still aren't really in the MCU in any meaningful way. As far as the multiverse cameo characters go, there are a whole lot, and they range from being cheap gimmicks to actually impressive feats of getting returning and new actors to come in and play parts you never thought you would see again, or at all, period. Some characters are only brought in as one-off jokes, which vary from being funny to lame depending on the context, but some of these characters actually get pretty decently developed scenes that serve as a last hurrah of sorts to the Fox era of films, and they carry a surprising amount of reverence for a Deadpool movie. Also, not to spoil too much, but Disney has now debuted 2 Fantastic Four members in their films, and both of them have suffered immediate and humiliating deaths. So isn't that just swell? The film also just barely has a villain in the form of Cassandra Nova. She is just kinda there. She has no real beef with the heroes, and they don't really care for her either, except when they merely need to borrow her power. She's also too strong for them to fight, so they just have to avoid her, until they eventually just beat her through contrived circumstances. She constantly feels like an afterthought throughout this adventure, so unfortunately, Cassandra Nova also contributes to the ever-growing MCU villain problem. And as far as the effects go, there are several noticeably sloppy shots that pop up every once in a while, though overall this movie looks a lot better than most of the other MCU products. The soundtrack for this film is a bit lackluster. They take the Guardians approach of mainly using radio songs, but these songs get chopped up in order to make room for the film's dialogue. It would be nicer if they could have a more legitimate soundtrack, though admittedly what they went with isn't completely horrible, and certain songs are fun in certain scenes. So all in all, I would give Deadpool and Wolverine around a 7 or 8 out of 10. It's heavily flawed, yet it's a lot of fun. As I've said, the plot is pretty nonsensical, but the true heart of this movie is its characters. If you're wanting to see some solid, interesting characters interact in entertaining ways, then you are sure to enjoy Deadpool and Wolverine. If you wanted to see these two have some bloody battles, then this movie is for you. If you hate the current direction the MCU is taking, this movie is for you. If you've been eagerly awaiting the X-Men to join the MCU, this movie is not for you. If you hate multiverses, this movie is not for you. But that'll about cover it for this review. I hope you found this video helpful. If so, be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with future content. Toodaloo.